Hello and welcome to a special edition of China Tonight. I'm Stan Grant. On the program, the National Party Congress is taking place in Beijing. What does the future hold for the world's most populous nation? We'll go to Beijing to hear from CNN reporter Tristan Nodalo. Explore more about Xi Jinping's record-breaking third term from the Economist's Sue-Lin Wong. And hear the latest news from Yvonne Yong. The eyes of the world have been on the Great Hall of the People this week, but what actually happens at the National Party Congress? Every 5 years, the National Congress kicks off a new political cycle in China.
To me, the National Party Congress is the crystallization of a lot of informal politics and policy discussions that go on all the time in China. But once every 5 years, you see a lot of this informal discussion and politicking being formalized.
The week-long meeting fills three main functions: setting the party's agenda, introducing revisions to the constitution, and selecting leadership. More than 2,000 delegates attend the event to represent the Chinese Communist Party's 90 million members.
To attend it is one of the great honours in Chinese politics. It's not just for anybody. Essentially, a lot of selection processes take place lower down the party hierarchy. So there'll be people who have been distinguished communist servants of the party down in villages, in townships, provincial level.
There are a mix of high-level officials as well as some representatives from major segments of the population like workers, PLA soldiers, and also representatives from the various ethnic minorities of China. So it's a mix of elite and mass representatives, if you will, but all of them party members, of course.
The Party Congress delegates are at the bottom of the pyramid hierarchy of the CCP. These delegates will vote on who will be part of the 200-strong Central Committee.
But within the delegations, typically the heads of these delegations will receive instructions basically telling the delegates how to vote on these different elections.
The Central Committee will then endorse the top decision-making bodies, the Politburo and its Standing Committee.
Boring sounding name, really important job. These are the absolute top creme de la creme of the Chinese Communist Party.
They will then decide on the party General Secretary, who will also become president.
One of the games that China watchers love is trying to guess who is going to make it to the top.
Major constitutional changes and additions are canvassed at National Congress, like in 1945, when Mao Zedong emerged as leader and his thought was enshrined as party ideology. The National Congress will also set the country's agenda, like in 1982, Deng Xiaoping's proposed socialism with Chinese characteristics, opening up China. So, historically, the week provides an insight for not just citizens, but the world, into what the country has planned for the next political cycle.
The Chinese Communist Party organises the congresses in such a way that they look very sober, very pre-planned, and almost nothing can go wrong. It's a little bit like the Oscars in that sense. It's very heavily coordinated beforehand.
So, as we've heard, the Congress is a highly structured, carefully planned out event, and whilst it's watched around the globe, only some of the world's media actually get to attend. Tristan Nodalo is a reporter for CNN Philippines. He was invited to China as a guest of the government back in August and was in the Great Hall this week. He joins me now from Beijing. Tristan, it's good to have you with us. When the government invites you to an event like this, what does that mean?
I am part of the China International Press Communication Center. It's a program for journalists around the world wherein they invite journalists to see China, to see how China progresses over the years. So I am one of two journalists invited from the Philippines, and we are around 97 journalists attending the programs.
What does that mean for covering an event like this? How many controls, what sort of censorship is placed on you because you were there at the invitation of the government?
Well, in terms of access, I think since it's the government who invited us, they give us as much access as they can. For example, we have the access to the Great Wall. They facilitated all our permits, all the documents needed for us to cover the Congress. So this is a good experience for me in the sense that I can see other countries or other governments do their political system, which is far different from us.
Well, it is very different to the way other countries do business, and I reported from there for a very long time, and I know the control the government tries to impose on foreign media. There isn't free media, free press as we understand it in the West. So if you wanted to speak to a protester, for instance, like the protester who unfurled the banner just the other day in Beijing, if you wanted to seek out people who had different points of view, would the government stop you?
We can do our stories. I think they just monitor the stories that we are writing. In terms of covering the protest, for example, because we don't have the access to go there right now when the protests happen, because we already checked in at the hotel, so it's a bit difficult for us to go and see it for ourselves.
And they monitor you. So what does monitoring mean?
Monitoring in the sense that they are checking our stories. The stories, they will just ask us on what kind of stories have we released, but they will not interfere in terms of editorial, or they will say that this is not good, this is not. They just ask, oh, if you tweet something about the event, can you just show us? More of like checking what kind of stories are out in the public.
Just finally, Tristan, given that you're being monitored, that people are watching what you're doing, there are restrictions on your movement, there are checks and balances everywhere, do you feel as if you can cover an event like this and walk away with a true picture, a critical eye as journalists need to apply to something like this? Or do you feel as if this is being very much managed?
Based from what I have experienced, when I did a story about the opening ceremony and President Xi's speech, I shared my stories to them, to those who would like to see what I did. So I just covered the opening ceremony, and then I added an analysis of experts so that they can share their thoughts on this. So at least this can provide a different perspective, not just coming from the Congress, but at the same time, there are analysis outside of Beijing. And then when I showed them, I didn't get any reaction. So I think it's just fine.
Tristan, good to talk to you. Thank you again.
Thank you.
As mentioned, the Congress is also when the next generation of party leaders come into focus. But trying to work out who they might be ahead of time is no easy feat. The upper echelons of party politics is often referred to as a black box, not known for being very transparent, as Annie Louie finds out.
So if Xi Jinping and Li Xi get their suits made at the same tailor, does that mean that Li Xi will get promoted if Han Zheng retires?
Because Chinese politics is so secretive, analysts and political enthusiasts are left to speculate on the future using sometimes trivial pieces of information. It's a ginormous web of personal connections, informal networks and factions.
If Xi Jinping's Chinese zodiac is a snake and Li Xi's is a monkey, that makes for good teamwork. So that might increase Li Xi's chances of being picked again.
We know very little about what really happens in the many important but closed-door meetings at the very top level.
Leadership decisions are announced at the end of the party congress, where the party faithful come together, including this dude, Song Ping, who's 105 years old.
Apart from the role of General Secretary, which is almost guaranteed to be Xi Jinping again, Xi abolished term limits in 2018, meaning he could very well be at the top until he's 105. One of the hottest debates is around who will make the cut for the Politburo Standing Committee.
It typically has 5 to 11 members, and they're the top decision makers in the country.
It tells us about how power resides, where power resides, how power transits in this system.
It's also closely watched because it could inform who the next premier is, the country's second most powerful person, who oversees the economy and social development.
The General Secretary, namely Xi's role, is vitally important, and he sets the general direction in many ways. But of course, as one of the members of the Standing Committee, the Premier is either the number 2 or number 3 person within the Communist Party leadership.
Keeping up?
Current Premier Li Keqiang is likely to retire in March, so speculation is rife for who will take over.
Some analysts believe it could be Wang Yang, who's already part of the standing committee. He caused quite a stir 10 years ago with something called cake theory, arguing the key to China's economic growth was to bake a bigger cake before dividing it. I can't really remember where I was going with that, but I could really do with some cake. Oh wow, thank you. Oh yeah, that's right.
Some people say that Wang's low profile and loyal service has put him in good stead, but he's also associated with some party factions that are out of favour, so that might work against him.
I think I agree with Wang on one thing though. We need a bigger cake.
He's probably the preferred candidate by especially the economic spheres. There have been a number of outlets that have suggested that Wang Yang might be actually sort of appointed as the premier.
But over here, you've got Hu Chunhua, who's the youngest of the vice premiers at about 59. He's an absolute spring chicken compared to that guy.
Like Wang, Hu has a lot of experience and will probably be promoted to the standing committee.
But he's climbed up the ranks outside of Xi's orbit.
The argument is he would want to have a more loyalist. He may also have a reason to choose someone who is not exactly just his former aide or something, but someone who has the experience. And also, if the things go badly, sometimes you need a fall guy.
Another name on the tip of many party watchers' tongues is Li Qiang, who doesn't have as much experience as the previous two pollies, but Li is close to Xi, even described by some as his protege.
He did carry out, for example, the Shanghai lockdown as the Shanghai Party secretary earlier this spring, which was pretty traumatic for many people. But also he was, as a result, a very loyal follower of Xi's as well.
If he becomes premier, it'll really show Xi's muscle within the party.
If we go by the rule, you have to have been a vice premier before being promoted, then it would be a pretty unprecedented move for Mr. Li Qiang to be appointed.
Note everyone's age, not too far from the CCP's informal retirement age of 68, and too old to take over as the head of the CCP.
Many analysts believe Xi isn't likely to promote someone who could potentially be his successor in order to eliminate competition.
Of course, it could be someone else entirely. We just don't know. There's no transparency. Confused? Me too. Anyway, we'll find out who's in the standing committee on Sunday, but we'll have to wait until March for a final announcement on who gets to become 2IC.
I think one thing we know for certain, which is the very top of this system, the very core of party's power structure will not have a female member. If you ask me to predict one thing, this is my one prediction, which I think will be proved correct.
Oh yeah, sure, that's fine, no worries, because I'm just a 60-something-year-old man who wants to be premier. See you in March.
The only other thing we can be pretty sure of is that Xi Jinping will secure his third term in the coming days. In 8 years in the top job, the world has formed an opinion, not always favourable. How accurate is that? And how is he seen at home? Sue-Lin Wong is a reporter for The Economist and the host of The Prince, a podcast exploring Xi's rise. And she joins me now. Good to have you with us. If we look at Xi Jinping, certainly from Western eyes, you look at someone who is seen as an authoritarian, almost dictatorial figure, a great man of history imposing his will and potentially dangerous for the world. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think Xi Jinping is incredibly ambitious, incredibly driven, very focused on consolidating and accumulating power. But as you say, he's also a man who deeply understands Chinese history. He sees himself as a true inheritor of the Chinese Communist Party.
Like the third of the great leaders, Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, and now he's finishing that work. That's how he sees himself, isn't it?
Exactly. His father raised Xi Jinping and his brothers and sisters to believe that they were true revolutionaries and that they would inherit the revolution.
He's what's called a princeling, of course. You mentioned he's the son of Communist Party royalty. But his family had really been through the ups and downs of the party. His father purged. Xi Jinping sent down to the farms during the Cultural Revolution. There are many reasons that he may have turned away from the party. Why the opposite?
His dad had a falling out with Mao and was purged, and Xi Jinping's whole life was turned upside down. And he was sent to live in a cave for 7 years. actually alongside millions of other Chinese of his generation, many urban youths.
And he saw that as the making of him, didn't it?
Exactly. And so, for many of his generation, they wanted nothing to do with the Communist Party after that traumatic childhood. And some wanted nothing to do with China. But Xi Jinping made a very different choice. And he actually decided to double down on the party and become redder than red. And so his conclusion from his childhood wasn't that the party in and of itself was bad. It was that the party had lost control. So if he ever rose to the top, he would make sure that wouldn't happen again.
How does he rise to the top? What's the trajectory from the boy sent down during the Cultural Revolution, his father purged, he enters the party and starts moving through the ranks? How does he get to the top?
So one thing that makes Xi Jinping a really interesting Chinese leader is that he's a tried and tested politician. He went to the provinces, which is kind of like the equivalent of a Communist Party MBA for Chinese officials. And he started at the bottom rung and he saw how brutal and ruthless the Communist Party is, and he rose through its ranks all the way to the party secretary of Shanghai, and then he became China's leader after that.
When he takes over, there is a lot of... China was at a bit of a tipping point. You'd had all of the growth of the economic revolution. It was emerging into a new era, becoming much more comfortable, even assertive with its power. But there were warnings from people like the former Premier Wen Jiabao about corruption that could cripple the party. There were rising tensions in the country. What does Xi Jinping look to deliver when he takes over to reassert the party and set the course for the nation?
When Xi Jinping came into power 10 years ago, the country was in crisis and the Chinese Communist Party was in crisis. As you're saying, corruption was rampant. There were hundreds of thousands of protests and there was infighting at the very, very top of the Communist Party. And he took power, he launched a signature corruption crackdown that he genuinely used to crack down on corruption.
But it was very popular too.
And it was popular, but it was also conveniently used by him to crack down on his political rivals. And then he also really ramped up ideological discipline within the Communist Party, which has nearly 100 million members, so many more people than the population of Germany. So he first seized control of the Communist Party through his corruption crackdown and ideology, and then having seized control of the party, he used it to seize control of the rest of China. And what we've seen over the past 10 years is he's constructed this censorship machine, propaganda machine, surveillance machine, which has made it incredibly difficult now for popular discontent to actually bubble to the surface.
What is the aim of this? I know he talks about a harmonious society. He talks about the China dream. He talks about returning China to the apex of global power. But where does this take a country if you crack down so hard, if you silence dissenting voices? What sort of a country are you leading?
I think we have to look back to his childhood and his teenage years and the chaos of all of that, because the lesson Xi Jinping drew is that that chaos cannot be repeated and there must be control. And there's only one institution in China who he believes can exert that control, and that's the Chinese Communist Party. And he just so happens to be the man who should be leading the Communist Party. So he's really driven by this desire for control and the sort of fear of chaos.
There was this belief that he has that the West is waning, the East is rising. This is China's time. It has a new model. You can export this model of authoritarian capitalism, if you want to call it that, to the rest of the world. Where does he want to take the country? And what does that mean for the rest of the world?
Well, going back to what we were saying about Xi Jinping's dad, his dad saw his mission as founding a strong China. And Xi Jinping sees himself as an inheritor of that mission. And he believes his role is now to make China even stronger, even bigger and even better. And so he talks about the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, which really is, to borrow a phrase, about making China great again. And so that's what's driving Xi Jinping. And as China's economy grows even bigger, and as the rest of the world is more intertwined with China's economy, what we're seeing is the Chinese Communist Party, led by Xi Jinping, using its economic might to bully and coerce other countries.
Now, what stands in the way of him achieving these ambitions? Will it be because he runs into opposition from other countries and China becomes isolated? Will it be that he simply cannot control everything? Will there be an uprising inside the country against this more dictatorial authoritarian turn? What stands in the way of him achieving this China dream?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. It's hard to know for sure. It's hard to know if he is going to achieve what he wants to achieve or if there are going to be serious headwinds. I mean, right now, looking at what's happening inside China, zero COVID and a slowing economy are both huge challenges.
An ageing population as well?
That's right. And then on top of that, you know, if as we expect he stays on for a third term, perhaps a fourth, perhaps for the rest of his life, that raises serious questions about succession, you know, who might take after him. And, you know, if we don't know who the successor is, that causes a lot of uncertainty at the top of the party.
And this leads to the final question, really. And I want you to try to look ahead and imagine what could happen. We know that emperors don't always end well in China. Mao Zedong, for all of his power, became incredibly paranoid. And that was part of the Cultural Revolution, part of the purging of other people like Xi's father. What's to say that Xi Jinping, even though he has crowned himself a new emperor, if you like, a leader for life, will actually stay in power?
Oh, that's anyone's guess. It's really, really hard to know. I mean, so much of Chinese politics is a black box. It's so opaque. And the indications are that he's going to appoint a bunch of his proteges, a bunch of his people over the next few days. He's going to become even more powerful than he currently is. But as you say, I mean, how long will that last? What happens if he gets sick in office? What happens if he dies in office? I mean, that's an open question.
Or if protests, and we've seen some signs of that, do actually gather steam. If the economy starts to weaken even more quickly, will we see a movement?
Well, I think what Chinese history teaches us is that it's often political infighting at the very top of the party that, you know, sometimes spills onto the streets that is the real risk for instability for the Communist Party. So yes, you know, popular discontent is something to keep an eye on, but also I think the real risk for Xi Jinping is if he creates enemies at the very top of the party. But right now we have no indication that that is the case.
Sue-Lin, terrific podcast you've done and fantastic to have you on the program. Thank you again.
Thanks, Stan.
So let's find out what actually happened this week. Joining me is Yvonne Yong. Yvonne, the propaganda machine was in overdrive ahead of the meetings.
Hi Stan, it sure was. This video has received millions of views online.
我是20大代表甘肃演艺集团歌舞剧院的舞蹈演员康琪。是作为一名舞者，能够将我们中国优秀的传统文化带给世界的观众，我感到非常的骄傲与自豪。
Kang Ji is a traditional Dunhuang dancer from Gansu province. Now, the clip is one in a series profiling delegates to the National Congress, and Weibo is awash with them. Like this one about Olympic gold medalist Gong Lijiao and the work she's doing, representing China on the world stage.
听了20大报告里，让我印象最深的一句话，就是寄语青年：怀抱梦想又脚踏实地，敢想敢为又善作善成。 这句话让我想起了我的追梦之旅。
And they aren't just on social media. This 16-part series is called The Navigator, a reference to Xi Jinping. It was running in prime time ahead of the Congress and recounted the historical achievements of the past decade under Xi.
But there have been some rare signs of protests in the capital.
Well, a few days before the Congress began, a protester hung this banner over a busy overpass in Beijing.
Strike to remove the dictatorial traitor Xi Jinping. Stand up, the people who do not want to be slaves.
It didn't take long for the person responsible to be bundled away. Photos and videos of the incident did cause a bit of a scene online for a short period before being censored. And a whole new occupation has been invented as a result. These are newly hired bridge keepers who now keep watch over the bridges of Beijing, hoping to scare away or catch possible copycats.
Day one of the Congress began with an epic speech by the President running 104 minutes, Yvonne, but what did it actually contain?
Well, in a speech designed to rally the party faithful and outline his vision for the future. Now, this one was actually a bit shorter than previous years. He spoke for 3.5 hours back in 2017.
党用伟大奋斗，创造了100年伟业， 也一定能够用新的伟大奋斗，创造新的伟业。
But his message was one of continuity rather than dramatic change.
So did we learn anything new about the policy priorities of his government?
Well, overall, it reinforced what have been key promises of recent years to do something about China's declining birth rate and rapidly ageing population. Carbon emissions and the environment also got a look in. There have been concerns China's transition away from coal and other fossil fuels has stalled amid a looming global energy crisis. But he said China's actively moving towards a clean and efficient use of coal while also protecting the environment and reducing pollution.
推进生态优先、节约集约、绿色低碳发展。
And over the last decade, President Xi has overseen an unprecedented crackdown on corruption at all levels of government. It's really been a pillar of his leadership.
只要腐败产生的土壤条件存在，反腐败斗争就一刻不能停。
And there had been some speculation, maybe even hope, that the Congress might mark a shift in China's COVID-0 policy.
Well, Beijing actually delayed the release of key economic indicators this week, but the pain being felt in the economy is widely documented, and that's in part being blamed on the continuing strict COVID measures. But President Xi hailed China's all-out people's war against the virus and showed no indication the government would change its pandemic policies anytime soon.
But the greatest applause during Xi's speech was saved for issues relating to national security.
Indeed, Stan, in the full report, Xi used the terms security or safety 89 times, an increase from 55 times back in 2017.
要坚持以人民安全为宗旨。 以政治安全为根本，以经济安全为基础，以军事科技文化社会安全为保障，以促进国际安全为依托。
On Taiwan, he said that the party is resolutely opposed to separatist activists and foreign interference.
解决台湾问题是中国人自己的事，要由中国人来决定。国家统一。 民族复兴的历史车轮滚滚向前，祖国完全统一一定要实现，也一定能够实现。
It struck a chord with netizens too. On Weibo, the hashtag solving the Taiwan issue is nobody's business but China's was the #1 trending topic on Saturday with over 670 million views.
Taiwan belongs to China all the time.
No one can interfere in China's internal affairs.
I can feel the faith and confidence in reuniting.
Well, as the Chinese saying says, interesting times ahead. Thanks, Yvonne.
Thanks a lot, Stan.
各位代表，中国共产党第20次全国代表大会现在开幕。
团结就是力量，团结才能胜利。以奋发有为的精神，把新时代中国特色社会主义。
And that's all for this special episode of China Tonight. We'll be back next year with brand new episodes. I'm Stan Grant. Have a great night.